morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm François de Beaupuy. I'm the energy reporter with Bloomberg News in Paris, and we have the pleasure to be with Claire WAYSAND, interim CEO of ENGIE, the French energy giant, and who has, like many companies, suffered from the coronavirus crisis and is still coping with that crisis. So Claire, from March to June, we've seen that governments and companies have had to work together to tackle with this terrible pandemic. Can you tell us how the governments and companies have managed to work together, and whether it's possible for companies to keep working with governments hands in hands efficiently in the future?
So good afternoon, everyone, and I'm very delighted to be with you today. On your question, François, yes, in the COVID crisis, what we have seen, and that's very encouraging, is that companies and governments have been working together on common goals. Actually, the goals were very simple. First goal was to protect the people in general for governments, protect our workers, protect our customers for company. The second purpose was ensure the continuity of what had to continue. Our societies, our communities have a number of essential functions that need to continue to be carried on, even in COVID crisis, and actually providing energy or providing critical services to cities, to hospitals, were critical services that we had to continue carrying during the crisis. That was the same for government, of course, at a higher level, and in particular providing social and healthcare services. So protecting the people, continuing essential operation, and thinking about the future. We had common purposes, governments and companies alike, and we carried them forward during the crisis. Looking ahead, I think when we think about the big challenges that we're going to have to face, obviously, and it's already there, it's climate change. Climate change will very much require joint action by governments and by companies. And I think in this, yes, I see this going forward. The good news is that stakeholders now are more and more convinced that there is a need for collective action, be it people, I mean, whether they are employees in our companies or whether they are voters, and whether they are investors. I mean, people are more and more realizing that a big challenge like climate change needs common action by governments and by companies, and I'm confident that that's what's going to happen.
And looking at this first phase of the crisis, which has left a lot of people in terrible situations, can you still draw some positive lessons from this crisis going forward?
Well, the first lesson I draw, and that's echoing your point on the situation of people, the first lesson I draw is the vulnerability of the people, be it on the health level, of course, be it also economic vulnerability. And I think we all have in mind the fact that this crisis, this COVID crisis, has been accompanied by a lot of suffering in families of people who were affected, both by the health situation or people losing their jobs. So certainly the vulnerability of the people to, I would say, natural external causes is a first lesson I draw. The second lesson I draw is more positive, is our ability to act together as before and change. We have been able to change very drastically a number of things and the ways we operate. Speaking about companies, for instance, I was saying before that we had to protect our people. We had to protect them when they were on site, and clearly for us, a number of people continued to be on site and are continuing to be on site, by the way, because we are throughout the world, even in periods of lockdowns, major lockdowns. At the same time, we put a major part of our workforce into a different work arrangement, which is work from home. On the 170,000 people working for ENGIE, we had at some point 65,000 people working from home. So that's just an example of how much we can adjust, how quickly we can adjust, and by the way, that was better for our carbon footprint. So I'm confident that that's the second lesson we have to draw. When faced with major challenges, humanity is able to change, and both companies and governments can act very boldly. I think that's a lesson we need to remember.
And then governments around the world are preparing stimulus packages to kickstart, revamp economies that are in deep slumps. On what criteria, in your opinion, should government base their recovery plans to boost this growth?
So the first, I think the first lesson we can keep in mind from the previous big economic crisis, 2008, was that first criteria is that a stimulus package has to be timely. It has to be timely because we need to sustain employment and activity in the short run. Second lesson, I think, is that these packages have to be targeted. And this is clearly especially relevant in the current circumstances. Targeted on what? Targeted on creating long-term value, both on the social front and on the ecological front. Why? Because we see, when we look at the challenges of our societies, and I think this has been discussed today, the first one is social cohesion. In a number of our societies, inequalities have been growing, and that's a threat to social cohesion. It's not only inequalities in income distribution, it's also inequalities in ability to have access to education, for instance. So first thing, we need to make sure that these stimulus packages are targeted towards social vulnerability and increasing social cohesion. And then second thing, this is also a unique opportunity to change the path of our economies. We are by now, I think, all convinced that if we continue the way we've been operating in the last few years, we are going towards a catastrophe in terms of climate change. We are now in a situation where there are lots of money being put on the table by governments, be it at national level, be it at European Commission level, for instance, and worldwide. This money is a unique opportunity to shift the path of the economies, to make sure that whatever investments we encourage now are investments that are going to help fight against climate change.
And you mentioned the fact that governments are going to invest a lot of money in, for instance, the energy transition. And usually this big amount of money tend to go to large companies. Isn't there a risk that there's a windfall effect for large companies and that smaller companies don't benefit that much from these packages? And usually, there's this idea that smaller companies are more innovative, whereas large companies maybe don't need that much money, but will capture it and to their own profit. How should governments work to avoid that risk of windfall effects?
Well, if we think about what should be done to put the economy on a more sustainable path on climate change, I think there are two things. One thing is energy efficiency. I think all studies show that in order to meet the targets that we need to meet on climate change, we need to reduce our energy consumption by one third to 40%. That's the first thing. How do we reduce energy consumption? There are several ways, and they're not all ways that benefit big companies. If you think about thermal renovation, energy efficiency for housing, that's a lot of very small companies that are operating very locally that are able to improve drastically the energy performance of houses. This is true for houses. This is true. We need energy efficiency for public building, for campuses, for hospitals, for cities. So these are very much activities that would benefit, I would say, both large, medium, small-sized companies. There is a whole chain of value of companies that are operating on energy efficiency. That's the first priority. Increase energy efficiency for companies, for municipalities, for private housing, so that for transportation, so that we reduce globally our consumption of energy. And then there is a second priority, which is renewable energy. And renewable energy we need to do several things. We need to continue to encourage the development of both photovoltaic energy and wind, be it onshore or offshore wind. We also need to move forward in encouraging green gas. When you think about green gas, for instance, I have in mind two things: biomethane. Biomethane, you were asking, is it big companies? No, not at all. Biomethane is very much local projects in territories, on farms. So this will benefit a number of farmers in our economies, the development of biomethane. And then the other green gas one has in mind these days, and I think it's very good that the awareness is rising, is of course green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is very promising. It's a renewable energy, it's storable, it is not intermittent, it can be transported, so it has a lot of very good properties that will be very useful in energy transitions. So as you see, and on energy efficiency and renewable energies, which are, I think, the two feet of what needs to be done to encourage energy transition, clearly this will benefit companies of all different sizes.
And Claire, I mean, tell us, what about ENGIE? How will ENGIE specifically benefit from these recovery plans? The company has announced recently that it wants to focus on renewable energies and on networks, whether it's gas or electricity networks, district heating and cooling. So how is the company positioning itself to benefit from these stimulus packages in the various countries where the numerous countries where the company operates?
Well, we are, I mean, this green recovery is really at the heart of what we are positioned to contribute to. Just a few facts about ENGIE, but I won't be overly specific or too long. The company has decreased its carbon footprint, dividing it by 2 in the last 5 years, and we're going to divide it by 2 again by 2030. And when you look at ENGIE today, the share of renewable energy is a bit below 30% of our energy production, and it should roughly double by 2030. So clearly, we are very much into, as you were mentioning, into investing and accelerating our investment into renewable energy. That's one thing. Second, we very much believe also in energy efficiency, and we are positioning ourselves on services that will help communities. And we have, for instance, big projects with a number of US or UK universities. We are also helping cities decrease their carbon footprint. We have, for instance, a project with Angers, a city in France, and we are helping companies that also want to decrease their carbon footprint globally. We very much believe that player by player, there is a lot that needs to be done, that can be done, and the good news is that both communities, companies are more and more interested into reducing their carbon footprint, and we are very well equipped to help them decrease this footprint.
And the company recently defined its raison d'être, its purpose, so to speak. Can you tell us a little bit more about this raison d'être of ENGIE and how it can help it position itself in this energy transition? What is it adding to the company? What is it bringing for ENGIE?
So yes, we have decided to adopt a raison d'être, a purpose. And when I say we have decided, the shareholders of ENGIE at the general meeting of shareholders have decided this in the bylaws of the companies. Why did we do this, and what does it say? Well, first, our raison d'être says, our purpose says that what we aim is to reconcile economic performance with a positive impact on the people and on the environment. So you see that we are very much at the heart of what we were describing. Having both, of course, an objective of economic performance, that's at the heart of what a company does, and at the same time, very much caring about wider goals, beneficial to the people, beneficial to the planet. Why did we choose to do this? Because we think that it's important for a company to have a meaning, to have, it's something that unites the people within the company, and this has been worked a lot, of course, with the employees, with the workers. So it unites the workers within the company, the stakeholders, the customers of the companies, and it's a meaningful guide to our day-to-day action. I mean, when each of us wakes up in the morning, goes to work, I think it's very inspiring to think that we are working in this broader context. And I would end by saying that, if you allow me, that when a company chooses to make the shift we have made, I was talking about reducing our carbon footprint by 2, doing it again by 2030, what happens is that this company becomes much more attractive. The young generations, but not only the young generations, are more and more aware, more and more willing to be working for a company that has a meaning that goes beyond economic performance. And what we've seen at ENGIE, and that was before the COVID, what we've seen at ENGIE is that the number of CVs, the number of applications we received, was multiplied by 3 in the last few years in parallel with this change. So what does it mean? It means that we're going to attract better and better people by having this goal, that's a wider goal, that's inspiring for all of us. And attracting more and more people means attracting better and better people, means really fueling the economic performance. So this purpose is a way for us really to make sure that we are increasing our economic performance, and not only because this wider goal is inspiring for all of us, but also because we very much feel that it's a condition for this economic performance, and I would say it's a condition for sustainable economic performance. I'm very much convinced that all companies now, if they don't ensure the sustainability of their business model, the alignment with wider goals, are going to find it very hard to have a consistent, sustainable economic performance. So that's what it means for us at ENGIE.
And a lot of companies are talking about how they are moving into the energy transition, and including some oil companies and certainly a lot of companies in the energy sector. But how can companies and stakeholders actually make sure that this is not mainly greenwashing, basically, and that companies are actually taking action? Are there benchmarks that should be developed to compare and contrast actions taken by companies?
Well, thank you for asking this question, because I think it's an important question. As you're saying, there are more and more companies who are claiming to make this shift. I think a number of them are making this shift, and that's a very good news. We should rejoice on the fact that companies are making the shift. But at the end of the day, I'm very much with you. We need facts. We need figures. I have a scientific background, so I believe in figures and in data. When you look at our data, I was talking about our greenhouse gas emissions divided by 2, going to be divided by 2 again by 2030. When you look at the share of renewable, 28% today, roughly double by 2030. That's evidence of what we're doing. And I would add that we are the first in France, we are the first energy company that has been certified by an international external auditor, science-based target. We are certified, our strategy is certified to be consistent with the 2 degrees increase in global temperature. So yes, we need facts, and I think that together with the moves which are being made across the board, and that's very encouraging that they are being based, at the end of the day, I think that external observers should require data, facts, and when you look at our data and our facts, you see that what we're talking about is not only a commitment for the future, but it's really already an action for the present. As we say, our raison d'être, our purpose, is really a reason to act. We have acted upon this purpose. We have worked to be beneficial to the environment and the people, and we will continue to do so, and it shows in precise facts.
And so in conclusion, Claire, do you have the feeling that governments and companies are moving fast enough to tackle the climate change issue and the energy transition issue, or are you concerned about the fact that the pandemic has slowed some projects and is taking a big toll on investments in various areas, including those important for the green transition?
Well, there are two questions in your question. Are we moving fast enough? I'm not sure. I mean, frankly, I think that we need very much to accelerate what we are doing. Otherwise, we will face climate change that will be unsustainable for all of us. So, yes, we need to move faster. And are we moving sufficiently fast today? My answer would be no. I would be, however, a bit more optimistic on the link with the pandemic. I think that the pandemic, the COVID crisis, has been, as we were saying before, somehow a wake-up call on our global vulnerability, and a wake-up call also on the fact that we could make bold acts, bold decisions by acting together. So I would be cautiously optimistic, I would say, on the fact that we have an opportunity, a collective opportunity, to make sure that the money that's spent today will accelerate energy transition. That's very much needed. We don't go fast enough today. We have this opportunity, it should be seized, and really I think it's very much up to fora like the one we're talking to today. It's very much up to international organizations to help create this movement, to help create this dynamic. We need to accelerate. It's a common goal. We don't have a choice. So let's make sure that whatever is done by governments these days will really help accelerate the energy transition.
Well, Claire, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your thoughts with all of us today. And it's been a pleasure, and looking forward to meeting you soon again to discuss all these topics.
Thank you very much, François, and thank you very much to all of you who listened to us.